Okay, so this is going to be mainly like a rant video, but I thought I'd just talk about, well, I'm wanting to start really a series of videos, called like the problem with, and then talk about like the problem with various aspects of our society. But this one's going to be sort of more general. Um, so it's, I would say, one problem that we're having right now, and like people are going to sort of lose their shit over it, but it's it's true, which is yeah, it's the problem with race. It's the problem with the level of power that different people hold in society. And one thing you'll notice if you just pay attention, is not everyone has the same amount of power. But it's not just different levels of power, it's also different kinds of power. So like you'll hear things like, oh, white people have more money than black people. And so, why is that? Well, it must be because of racism and systems of power that are benefiting white people and not black people. And, okay, I'll go over that in another video, but uh, that's just one form of power. And people are kidding themselves on the idea that it's all about money and that all that matters is like financial power. I mean, don't get me wrong, obviously that matters, but not to the extent people think it does. People think that it's way more important than it actually is. Just again, it's it's still important, but just not as much as people think. And another kind of power, which goes in the opposite direction, is social power. And you don't really need to you don't need to pay that much attention to come to the conclusion that black people obviously have way more social power. If it wasn't for like the Latinos, basically, they would have a monopoly on social power. Uh, so a good example is like a particular word that you're not allowed to say, you know, and if you do say it and you're the wrong race, you're automatically evil, and now we're going to get you fired and have all these like massive uh, repercussions, financial, societal, just like huge consequences for ultimately just saying a word. You know, and yes, there's like history behind it and all that, but it's still a stupid thing. It's just ridiculous. Uh, but yeah, and besides just like a word, it's more than just a word. It's lots of words in forms of sentences. You know, black people can obviously joke about whatever they want. They can joke at white people's expense. White people are more or less expected to just take it. Uh, that does not go the opposite direction. White people are not allowed to joke about black people. We all know this is true. If you're like a young liberal or just a woman watching this, you probably feel the urge to push back on that. But I mean, just think about it in your own life and just be honest. It's like you know that's true. You know that's true. You could say I'm like exaggerating or whatever, but like you know it's true that like black people are given a free pass to say maybe not whatever they want, but more than what white people are allowed to get away with. And the question is, well, why is that? Why is it that black people are sort of, given this free pass and allowed to say whatever they want? Well, it's imagine if you have two kids, right? And we'll go ahead and name them. You have Derek and Jamal, or Javante. How about that? A little less generic, right? So, uh, Derek, he's timid, he's quiet. He sort of does what he's told. Tell him to go do dishes or whatever. He does whatever chores he has. But Javante, he doesn't want to do chores. And when he does do chores, he complains about them. Now, you could stand there and say, I'm a strict parent. I'd discipline them equally. I'd, you know, uh, both reward and punish to like an equal degree. But the reality is that's not what you see in the world. And it's especially not what you see on like a grand scale when you're dealing with like big numbers. You might see that when you're dealing with real small numbers, individuals, but you're not going to see that with a big number. And so, you know, what's going to end up happening is Derek is going to be the one doing most of the dishes, most of the laundry, most of the chores. And Javante is going to not really do much. He's going to mooch off of his parents. And there's not really going to be a harsh punishment for him because it's just not worth it to punish him. He's always making a big deal out of things, and you just don't want to deal with it. And also, I think there's a little bit of a sort of like your mind starts to become uh, locked into certain things. And so, if you're sort of used to taking shit from someone, you you end up sort of accepting it more and more. And even if that's your kid, if they're uh, hold on. All right, I'm back. So, uh, yeah, but as I was saying, even if that's your kid, it's like your mind will start to become sort of uh I don't know. Your mind is plastic to the environment, and after doing a particular thing or getting used to some sort of stimuli, after a while, you'll grow to accept it. And so, whether it's like taking shit or whether it's even the opposite, having someone sort of constantly back down to you, that becomes sort of your norm. And so, you know, going back to with Derek and Javante, uh, yeah, it's like you'll gradually accept Javante's sort of snickering and his sort of just kind of shitty attitude, whereas with Derek, you'll accept his timid attitude, and if he hypes up, if he puffs out his chest even a little bit, you'll be real quick to correct it. Whereas with Javante, you just sort of accept that, and it's like, oh well, that's norm, or that's the norm, and yeah, and so uh, that is sort of been played out on a grand scale in terms of just the races. Uh, yeah, so you know, white people are they're more timid and they don't want to rock the boat. They're sort of pushovers. Black people are not that. Yeah, they're much more combative. They don't uh they don't just yield to some sort of social pressure. It's like and a lot of people they'll sort of strawman this and say like, oh, you know, are you saying black people don't care what anyone says at all? Then why do they do all these things? If they don't care, why listen to their moms? Why blah blah blah? It's like I'm talking about a spectrum. It's we're talking about a trait which is agreeableness, and human beings fall on what's a pretty wide spectrum, and black people and white people differ on that spectrum. Not really to a huge degree, but to a noticeable degree and a meaningful degree. And those averages matter, right? Those averages are millions of people following falling into what's a small band of sort of behavioral variation. And you can look at the extremes and you'll see, a ton of overlap. Like a super disagreeable white person will be more disagreeable than, the average black person. And a super agreeable black person will be more agreeable than the average white person. But we're talking about numbers, we're talking about averages, we're talking about trends, right? And also, all those things matter, right? So they may not be like hard rules or whatever, but like they matter. And yeah, people don't get they don't understand that like relatively small differences can have a big impact, when you really pull things back and look at like a societal level. So yeah, and that's what I think it is. Uh, People will say, well, why is it that? And that's somewhat of a different question, but like not really, because the question comes down to really, it comes down to sort of equality and the idea of equality. But I think maybe I'll save that for another video. Uh, yeah. So, but yeah, like social power is, it's a different thing or there's very different levels for different groups. And like the whole idea of like the oppression Olympics, like people laugh at that and like they joke at that and they go like, "Oh, that's dumb." No, real people don't think like that. But that's obviously it's true to some extent. That's sort of the society we live in. If you're black, you're basically at like the top of society. Uh, well, in terms of sort of, social things you can say, do, get away with. You can make all sorts of wild accusations, and like that's fine. There will be like no consequence or a minor one. And after blacks, I'd probably say that it's sort of a competition between like Native Americans, Indians, um, Arabs, and Latinos. sort of like a sort of like a four-way match there. I'd probably say Latinos would win just because they're more numerous. So I'd probably say Latinos would follow next. But then after that, it'd be like a real sort of fight for, the third spot. And then after that, I would say Asians. And then after that, if you want to separate them, which you probably should, I would say Jews and then whites. But that's not really true because the thing with Jewish people, and don't freak out about it, alright? I'm not saying anything bad about them, but uh, the thing about them is when they're sort of shitted on, it's usually because they're viewed as white. So it's like, just like with what's going on with Israel and Palestine, quote unquote Palestine. Um, like that whole thing, the reason why sort of in America and particularly like American colleges, which is all basically just left wing institutions, pretty much, more or less. Um, yeah, they're sort of looking at it through an American black white lens, and so they see that Jews are more white than the Palestinians who are more quote unquote black. Um, so yeah, that's sort of how it's viewed.
and that is something that's, I mean, it's false. It is, but like there's truth to it. Like yeah, obviously Palestinians aren't black, but like they're poor. They have oh okay they have higher crime rates. All right, they I guess I might as well get into it. They they have lower average IQs, you know, and so you sort of look at the Palestinians and the Jews, and it does somewhat mirror, what's going on with whites and blacks. Not perfectly, obviously. I mean, they're different groups, but like, there is a similarity there. But yeah, I I think what you have here, and I've sort of danced around this. It's because this is a rant video, right? So it's not like well structured. This is my second video, so I'm not. So there's like 3% effort in this. I have 0 subs. Now maybe that'll change, maybe, but like right now, this is a low effort endeavor here. I'm not fucking putting all the resources in the world into this. Um, but yeah, what was I saying? Yeah. So the the Palestinians are, well, yeah, but really just like poorer people, we'll say, tend to advocate for themselves a whole lot more than more wealthy people. And so like, the reason why black people have all the power, social power in America, well, almost all of it, is because they're the ones that advocate for their own group more than any other. And it's a little bit close with Latinos, and it's close with Arabs, but like the thing is like the Latinos can compete with with numbers. I mean, they actually outnumber them, but um, but there's still, I don't know, there isn't as much, and maybe part of it is just a visual thing, you know. People are gonna kind of freak out, but it's like black people are very visually distinct, not to like a sort of, I don't know, uncomfortable degree, but like to a degree to where you notice it, real easy. There's no like confusing it. Like you'll see Latinos that look white. You'll see whites that look, sort of Asian-ish or whatever, like Russians or at least Eastern Russians. But uh, yeah, so you'll have sort of the different various groups that will, they all look different from one another, but like black people look pretty distinct. And because of that, like it becomes real, I don't know. The tribes are immediately recognized. Because they're immediately recognized, it's like there are walls immediately put up. Like instantly, So it's like with Latinos, you might talk with one for a while, and you might be like, white or wherever, and or Arab. Here, like one thing that will commonly happen is Arabs and Latinos get confused for one another because they look so similar, you know, and that's sort of what I'm talking about. Like if they're talking with one another, there won't be an immediate sort of barrier. But like if black people talk with pretty much any other group, there's pretty much an immediate barrier there where it's like, okay, you're not my tribe, you know. And I'm not saying that that's good or that's how things should be or whatever. I'm just saying like that's how it is, And so uh, I think part of the reason why you sort of see that, it's not the only reason, but part of the reason is you you know, uh, black people are, they're more visually distinct, and so they sort of tribe up more than other groups, which are kind of like, you might be like me, I don't know, whereas black people are like, well, you're not black. So yeah. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, you could sort of lose your shit in the comments, but I don't really have any viewers, so but that could change, So I could check up on this in like a month or whatever and get maybe 100 views. Who knows? Who knows? I might even get banned before before this shit sort of takes off. I hope not, but we'll sort of see, because yeah, that's how YouTube is. You can't say anything basically. All right. Well, that's about it. So, all right, let's hope that the video turns out okay. All right.